The marina developer's surveyor arrived on a Monday morning without calling ahead. Lena Marsh was watching from the kitchen window of her mother's house when the truck pulled up to the waterfront. She had been in Georgia for 2 weeks and had not yet decided what she was going to do with the property, and she was not in the mood for a surveyor she had not hired walking her dock with a measuring device. She went outside. Her Doberman Petra came with her. The surveyor was a young man with a vest and a clipboard. He explained that he was conducting a boundary assessment on behalf of Tidewater Landing Development, which had acquired the adjacent marina property 18 months ago and was in the process of expanding its footprint along the creek. He said the assessment was routine. Lena asked what routine meant in this context. The surveyor said Tidewater Landing believed the waterfront access rights on this section of the creek had been historically shared under a riparian agreement dating from the 1970s, and that they were confirming the extent of those rights as part of their expansion planning. Lena said she was not aware of any such agreement and asked him to leave until she had spoken with an attorney. The surveyor said he would note her objection and relay it to Tidewater Landing's legal team. He left. Petra watched him go from the end of the dock with the focused attention she gave to people she had decided were not to be trusted. Lena went back inside and called her brother in Atlanta, who told her he knew nothing about a riparian agreement either. Then she called an estate attorney in Savannah and made an appointment for the following week. That evening, she started going through their mother's files. Ruth Marsh had died in October at 81. She had owned the property outside of Darien, Georgia, for 46 years. A white frame house set back from the creek, 2 acres of yard and garden, a dock that Ruth had used for crabbing and kayaking, and sitting in the evening watching the tidal creek move. Lena was 49, former Coast Guard, and had driven down from Charleston when the estate was settled. Her brother David had declined to make the trip. He had a life in Atlanta, and the property was, in his assessment, more trouble than it was worth, and they should sell it and divide whatever it brought. Lena had not agreed with that assessment. She had come to make her own. The property was on a tidal creek off the Georgia coast, surrounded by salt marsh, with a view from the dock that had not changed in 46 years and was not going to change as long as the marsh stayed intact, which was most of the argument for owning it, in Lena's view. The marina next door was the complication. Tidewater Landing had bought the old bait shop and boat ramp property 18 months ago, and had spent the intervening time acquiring permits and making plans that Lena had only become aware of when the surveyor showed up on her dock. Ruth's files were in a cedar chest in the back bedroom, organized in folders by year. Lena went through them slowly, looking for anything related to waterfront rights or riparian agreements or the marina property. She found nothing that night or the following day. Petra had been working the property since the first morning, the way Dobermans work things, which is with a systematic intensity that covers ground quickly and revisits anything that did not resolve on the first pass. She checked the house perimeter, the garden, the tree line along the north boundary, the dock, and the creek bank. On the third evening, she went under the dock. Lena noticed, because Petra did not go under things. She was not a dog built for low spaces, and she did not seek them out. But she went under the dock from the bank side, moving carefully through the mud and the barnacled pilings, and stayed there for several minutes before coming out the other side and looking at Lena with the expression she used when she had found something she could not retrieve herself. Lena put on her waders. The dock was built on timber pilings, 6 of them, sunk into the creek mud at intervals. It was original to the property, built when Ruth bought it in 1978, and had been repaired and reinforced several times over the years, but never fully replaced. Petra had gone to the third piling from the bank. Lena crouched beside it in the mud and shone a flashlight along the base. Attached to the piling 8 inches above the mud line, held in place by 2 stainless steel hose clamps, was a section of white PVC pipe about 14 inches long, capped at both ends with threaded caps sealed with plumber's tape. The clamps were newer than the piling. Someone had put them there deliberately and relatively recently. Lena worked the caps off with her hands. The seal was tight. Inside the pipe, wrapped in a plastic bag, were 2 documents. The first was the original deed to the property, issued to Ruth Marsh in 1978. Lena had seen the recorded copy in the estate paperwork. This was the original, with the county stamp and Ruth's signature, and the property description running to 2 pages. The second document was what made her sit down in the creek mud without caring about her waders. It was a conservation easement, filed with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources in 1989. Ruth had placed a permanent conservation easement on the waterfront portion of the property, specifically the dock, the creek bank, and the 40 feet of upland buffer behind it. The easement prohibited any commercial development, any alteration of the creek bank, and any transfer of waterfront access rights to any third party, permanently, attached to the deed. Binding on all subsequent owners, there was also a letter, 1 page, Ruth's handwriting, dated 2 years before she died. Ruth had written that she had filed the easement in 1989 because she had been approached by a developer that year who wanted to purchase the waterfront access rights to expand a marina operation. She had declined and had filed the easement specifically to prevent any future claim of that kind from having legal standing. She had written that she had put the documents under the dock because she did not trust paperwork left in houses after floods. The property had flooded twice in the 1990s and once in 2016, and each time she had lost things she had not meant to lose. She had written, "If you are reading this, you found it the right way. The dock has good bones, so does the property. Keep both." Lena read the letter twice in the mud under the dock with the flashlight and the sound of the tidal creek moving around the pilings. Then she climbed out and called the attorney in Savannah and told her what she had found. The attorney's name was Grace Okafor, and she had been practicing property and conservation law in coastal Georgia for 18 years. She read the easement document the following morning at her office in Savannah and called Lena before noon. She said, "A DNR-filed conservation easement in Georgia is one of the strongest property protections available. It is permanent, it runs with the land, and it is enforceable by the state as well as by the property owner. Tidewater Landing's riparian rights claim is directly foreclosed by this document. They cannot acquire, exercise, or claim any waterfront access rights on this property. Ever." Lena asked about the 1970s agreement the surveyor had mentioned. Grace said she had pulled the county records. There was no riparian agreement on file from the 1970s for this property. Tidewater Landing's claim appeared to be based on a general assertion rather than a documented instrument. The conservation easement made the point moot regardless. Grace sent a formal letter to Tidewater Landing's legal team the following week, attaching the conservation easement and the DNR filing confirmation and advising them that any further surveying activity on the property without permission would be treated as trespass. Tidewater Landing's attorney responded 10 days later. The letter was brief. The company was withdrawing its riparian rights claim and would not be conducting further assessments on the property. Lena called David in Atlanta and told him. He was quiet for a moment, then he said that was good news, and asked if she was still planning to sell. She looked out the window at the dock and the creek and the salt marsh beyond it. She said she was not planning to sell. David said he understood, and that he would leave the decision to her since she was the one who had actually gone down there. He said to let him know if she needed anything. She said she would. She stayed. She had known she was going to stay before the surveyor arrived, before the PVC pipe, before any of it. The property had decided her in the first week, the way some places decide you before you have finished deciding yourself. She fixed the dock properly that fall. She hired a marine contractor who knew tidal creek work, and they replaced 2 pilings that had deteriorated and added a float at the end that Ruth had always talked about doing and never gotten to. It took 3 days, and when it was finished, the dock was better than it had been when Ruth built it. She kept crabbing the way Ruth had crabbed, which was with a drop net and a chicken neck and no particular urgency about the outcome. She learned the tidal schedule and the best spots along the creek, and the specific time in the late afternoon when the light hit the marsh in a way that made everything look like it had been arranged deliberately. Grace Okafor became someone she called occasionally about property matters and occasionally just to talk, which was how it went with people who had done something significant for you in a place you had decided to stay. The cedar chest full of Ruth's files was still in the back bedroom. Lena had added her own folders to it. She kept it organized the way Ruth had kept it, by year, with the conservation easement and the deed and the letter from under the dock in a separate folder at the front, labeled in her own handwriting. The PVC pipe was on the shelf above the kitchen window. She had cleaned it and kept the caps on it. It was not decorative. It was just the thing that had held what mattered, and it belonged somewhere visible. Petra had the dock. She had decided this in the first week, and it had not been subject to negotiation since. She lay at the end of it in the mornings while Lena drank coffee on the porch, watching the creek, her head on her paws, her dark coat catching the early light. She was not a dog given to unnecessary demonstrations. She did what was required, and then she settled into the life that surrounded the work. The dock was hers, and the creek bank was hers, and the 40 feet of upland buffer behind it was hers, and none of it was going anywhere. Ruth had made sure of that in 1989. Petra had made sure Lena knew where the proof was. The marsh stayed intact. The creek moved with the tide the way it had always moved. The dock held. Lena had told Petra about Ruth sometimes in the evenings, the way you tell a dog about someone they did not get to meet, but would have understood. Petra listened with the serious attention she brought to everything Lena considered worth saying, which was, Lena thought, exactly the right response. Every story on this channel starts the same way. A veteran and his dog, and something the dog knew before the man did. New story next week. Subscribe if you want to be here when it drops.